Welcome everyone to today's CFOLC program, Touchless AP Automation, a real-world approach towards end-to-end P2P optimization. My name is Angela Tice. I'm the National Membership Chair and Northeast Regional Director of the CFO Leadership Council, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session. I just want to do a little housekeeping before we actually get started. You might have noticed your lines are muted, and that's so that there are no distractions. However, we certainly encourage your questions and your comments throughout today's discussion. So please feel free to type your question in the questions area, and I'll make sure to ask those questions on your behalf. I will be monitoring that area so that your questions are asked as they come through. If you are a member of the CFO Leadership Council, you will receive one CPE for today's webcast. In order to receive CPE, you must be a current member and answer 3 of the 4 polling questions asked today. I will interrupt the discussion to bring those to you. And in order to answer the polling questions effectively, you must be logged into today's session. If you've dialed in and you want to receive CPEs, please hang up and use the direct link provided to you at registration. So if you want CPE, you must be on your computer. If you're wondering how to become a member of the CFO Leadership Council, connect with me after the webcast. We have 2 levels of involvement, and membership starts the day you join. So the good news is, if you join today, you qualify for CPE today. There will be a brief survey immediately following today's discussion. NASBA, who certifies us for CPE, does require that we send it, but we really hope that you take the time to complete it, because we take that input and we really use that to make sure that we're giving you what you're looking for and bringing value to the CFO LC community. So please do take the couple of minutes truly that it takes and answer. We would really appreciate that. And that's really it for the housekeeping. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We actually have 2. We have Eduardo Diquez, Intelligent Automation Director at Auxis. Eduardo has been leading RPA and intelligent automation practices since 2016. With over 10 years of experience in consulting, he has a proven track record in the design and implementation of shared services strategies and back office optimization initiatives. Prior to Auxis, Eduardo worked at Accenture, where he was involved in multiple process optimization and cost reduction projects for leading CPG companies across the Americas. And then we have Steve Rapier, he's the Regional Sales Manager at Ephesoft. From the advent of KFI, which is key from image, to AI and RPA, Steve has spent over 25 years helping customers leverage software technologies into solutions that save time, effort, and money. Prior to Ephesoft, Steve worked in multiple organizations in the industry, including Kodak, IBM, Westbrook, and AnyDoc. I appreciate so much that both Eduardo and Steve are here today. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some really cool knowledge with our audience. I know that they're going to get a lot out of it. So with that, Eduardo, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. I think today we're going to be discussing a very, hot topic, important topic, and I'm really glad to have Steve and his team to be able to accompany me today to talk about how companies are achieving touchless AP automation in their finance organization. So without further ado, let's get into it. So as you guys know, before we even begin and talking about details on how to get to AP automation, I thought it would make sense to really take a step back and really discuss why is automation important on the finance organizations. Most traditional corporate finance operating models are really outdated and are really not well positioned to deliver on today's demands. They're really focusing, as you guys have seen it, is in traditional finance, very transactional, focus more than 70% of the time, sometimes even 80% of the time. What we have been seeing is just pushing transactions and looking at historical data and really being just bookkeepers. In the traditional world, in the modern world, and this is what we are seeing more and more, that businesses are expecting for their finance organizations to be much more of a true business advisor, commercially and performance focused, and really looking at how to provide information for decision making and decision support. In order to do that, we have a lot of different initiatives that have been happening across the industry, including digital transformation and automation. But how do we get there? most of the organizations are now seeing 85% of finance organizations are going through some type of finance transformation. And what does that mean? In most cases are really trying to make this shift. And we have seen now from different surveys and different companies out there that are creating studies around what are CFOs doing. 63% of CFOs from one of the studies are really trying to shift in the next 3 years their organization from this traditional finance that we mentioned to a true modern finance, focusing on prediction and decision support. But in order to get there, naturally, there's going to be a lot of technology implementation that will have to get done. And with that comes the fact that a lot of these projects fail, and or they're outright extremely challenging to get it implemented. And in order to do that, companies are trying to or are building ecosystems around themselves to really leverage the technology implementers and consultants that can actually bring the talent to make this happen, because they're finding it harder and harder to really just build in these capabilities in-house. As we know, it's becoming a lot more challenging. So that being said, why do we think about accounts payable automation? As we know, it's incredibly manual. There's a really high turnover in these positions. Most of the people who are taking jobs in the accounts payable, specifically in invoice processing, invoice indexing, usually stay on those jobs no more than 6 months. And the simple reason it's because it's repetitive. It's just boring for the people who are in our technology world of these days. So it's really hard to maintain those people. And then there is a lack of visibility of outstanding liabilities or performance metrics. We know what's in our systems and what's in our ERP, what has been processed, but we absolutely don't know what has not been processed, or is really difficult or very manual to understand what is in pending approvals, if we don't have a really structured workflow with data or metadata inside of that workflow to really be able to pull that data and provide visibility to management. And that leads basically to a lot of struggles on high processing costs of these invoices and payments across the board, and then a lot of inefficiencies on our resources. And to put it in a simple sentence, we're just leaving money on the table as part of this. So it is important to really think about how do we change all of these issues that we're having on a day-to-day basis into moving into a more modern finance organization. So it's important that you guys think, you're not alone. There is a lot of benchmarking out there, and there are different things that can be said about benchmarking, specifically when we have so many different industries that have very different accounts payable needs, and procure to pay functions are very structured in very different ways. But we have found that the number of invoices processed per FTE per year, it's something that is a very good one to really balance across many different industries. You have a person that is trying to process invoices, and we have seen that top performers can get all the way up to 20,000 invoices per person when bottom performers are only doing 5. And the simple reason why this happens is that the top performers are implementing automation and have which enables them to really increase their productivity. The true realistic goal that you guys should have as part of your automation journey and productivity should be to be in the medium to top performer level of in this benchmarking.
Eduardo, before you move on, I'm going to launch our first polling question, because actually it has to do with what you're talking about right now. So let's give our audience a question. And the question is, what is the biggest pain point in your AP process today? Select one. It could be non-scalable, highly manual process, not paying my vendors on time, high turnover, difficult to retain and train talent, or lack of visibility to outstanding liabilities and metrics. So if you can answer those questions quickly, we'll give that back to Eduardo and to Steve, and then we can move on and hear more from our speakers. I'll just wait another second or two, and again, the more quickly you can answer that, the more we can gather that information and then share it back out with all of you so that you can see what your peers are actually going through as well as yourself. We'll wait just a couple more seconds and then I will close the poll. It's always interesting to get this information, especially since you're addressing it.
Great.
Just one more second and then I'll share the results with everyone. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share. So it looks like the biggest pain point, 59% of you say non-scalable, highly manual process. Only 2% of you say not paying my vendors, 12% high turnover, difficult to retain and train talent, and 27% say lack of visibility to outstanding liabilities and metrics. So back to you.
So that's great. I think that more and more we're seeing that the lack of visibility to outstanding liabilities, as it's shown in the poll, it's something that is becoming, people are just wanting to close the books faster. They just want to have, the CFOs just want to understand, close their accruals quicker, and that is a recurring issue that we're seeing across the board. So what are top performers doing right? And let's get into a little bit of detail on that. So automation is one of those things. You know, finance and accounting is one of the functions that has the highest levels of adoption on technology, specifically robotics. And within finance and accounting, we have seen that accounts payable, from surveys that we have done, 70% of the people who started with automation started in finance and accounting and accounts payable specifically. The other thing that they're doing is that they are leveraging a low-cost labor location. So as we know, labor markets in the United States are extremely tight, and trying to find that additional talent pool that can actually do it at a much efficient, better cost. It's something that a lot of the top performers are doing. As you can see on this study, 44% of finance organizations are looking for a nearshoring location to help them on this, and 22% are thinking about offshoring in offshore locations. So we're looking at about 2/3 of all finance organizations really leveraging a lower cost location across these studies. And then is the real-time analytics. You know, 89% of CFOs are really thinking we need to bring in additional analytics, and this goes to the modern finance conversation that we're having at the beginning, which is becoming that business partner that can actually provide on-time, real life information for decision-making support.
Eduardo, I think I'm going to interrupt you again and just launch the next question, because I think, again, it has to do with everything that you're talking about right now. So let's just find out from the audience, how many employees do you currently have in your AP department? It'll be interesting for the rest of the conversation. So audience, again, if you can just give us your answers quickly, I can share that back out with our speakers. Just a couple more seconds. Thank you, Eduardo, for letting me interrupt you again.
Great. I think it's important.
We like to know our audience, that's for sure. Couple more seconds and I will collect that. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. Thank you, audience. And the answers are less than 5 is 60%, 15% said 5 to 10, 21% said 10 to 20, and 4% said more than 20. So now you know a little bit more about your audience, Eduardo.
Awesome. It's a good mix of sizes, and we have built this type of automations for organizations that for various sizes. We're gonna do a little bit of digging around that, but it goes from organizations that only have 3 people on their accounts payable invoice processing team to people who have a couple of dozen people doing this type of work. So it's good to see that we have a variety of sizes on panel. So moving along, so why did we choose invoice processing as part of the automation? Why is it such a critical piece of why we should focus on it? There's many areas where you can think about automating on the procure-to-pay, specifically accounts payable side, from vendor master to payments processing to the actual coding, GL coding of some invoices based on historical data or standard coding data. to really the receipt indexing and processing. And one of the reasons why is there is a large concentration of time and effort being spent in that specific area of accounts payable. And there is a lot of data entry, which leads to a lot of errors and typing errors where, and you're going to see a little bit in the next few slides, that robotics and adding this layer of our data, artificial intelligence data capture will increase the accuracy significantly. But it also is because it's the root cause of a lot of things within the accounts payable, time spent processing invoices and getting vendors paid, specifically with inquiries. If you delay or you miss invoices and they're just calling you nonstop to understand where they are, the root cause always happens here. And this is why we have chosen to focus here, and we're going to be seeing the solution that we have built. So the next thing is, in today's world, there's many different ways that you can go about automating accounts payable. There's many different providers. Some of them will only provide technology. Some of them will do solutions that are very specific to some ERP solutions, let's say SAP solutions, build around that. And there are some that use a combination of technology and labor, offshoring locations that then, but how do we choose one or the other? And that becomes a daunting and very confusing task for most organizations. So the way that we have laid it out, and we've done some assessments on people who are using some of the services compared to the solution of automating using artificial intelligence data capture and robotics, and this is what we have found. So regarding the implementation timeline, they could be about the same. It's going to take you about 3 months to stand up a solution, to do the migration, set it up. The implementation cost, there are some that are going to be, if you're going to use a provider that is actually going to just outsource some of your functions and then add some technology, there may be very limited upfront investment as it's compared to using RPA, intelligence data capture, and workflow. But if you look at the ongoing costs, it becomes, you're just going to be paying forever a significant amount of money for these technologies, and they're not flexible. In some cases, you just have to switch to their systems, to their interaction applications, and that requires an additional organizational change. But then the percentage of true touchless invoices is not very high, which means that you're either going to have to keep throwing bodies at the problem, or they will have to throw bodies at the problem, which will entail just having larger fees or a larger cost per invoice. And this is where we believe that the solution that we're about to talk about, it's very different. So I just wanted to first talk about the 3 main pieces of technology that are required to, in our mind, to go through where we are today into a manual processing of invoices to really a touchless AP. There are 3 main things, and I'm gonna let Steve dig a little bit more deep into FSoft. But we have the artificial intelligence data capture. Then we're gonna need a document repository system and a workflow approval system, and then using robotics. It's important to say that the column in the middle box is our current partner of content management, file sharing, and workflow tool. But both technologies can be used with any content management like SharePoint or internal image now, any type of document management system that you guys are using today, it can be leveraged the same way. So it's incredibly flexible. So Steve, I would like for you to give us a explanation of FSoft. What can it do, and run us through specifically for accounts payable invoice processing. What can it do for companies?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Eduardo. I appreciate the opportunity. So if you could open that first box. Thanks very much. So there's 3 components here, as Eduardo just mentioned, that actually comprise the solution, and they're really they're brought together to build out a best of class approach to this. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the Ephesoft side. And putting all the technology aside for just a second, what this software does is emulate an AP knowledge worker, somebody that's familiar with your business, someone that's familiar with the vendors, also knows all the business rules required to get an invoice into the system properly so it doesn't create chaos on the back end. And what I mean by that is at the end of a check run, post-check run checks, you're finding out that vendors were overpaid, underpaid, double paid, or not paid at all. So that's what we're trying to prevent. We want to make this process much faster and smoother on the front end, but we want to eliminate that reconciliation work that's being done as well. Excuse me. So let's just talk a little bit about the Ephesoft product. The first thing we need to do is get an invoice into the system. And typically the way we do that today is to monitor one or more mailboxes, email boxes that have been set up for vendors to submit their invoices. They can submit those in PDF format, Word, Excel, TIFF, and a number of other image types that we support. And we even support scanning. So if there's a need to convert hard copy into digital format, we can do that as well. So once the sources or the data is in as an unstructured document, we go into a classification process. Again, emulating that knowledge worker, our system can tell the difference between an invoice, a PO, bill of lading, packing slip, etc. Because we're looking for document types where we can apply business rules, extract data, and complete this process. So trailing documents like a bill of lading or a proof of delivery, things like that, they're great as a trailing document, but we just want to concentrate on the invoice. And once we do that classification, if there's any question at all by the software that says, yeah, I think this is an invoice, but I'm not exactly sure. I've looked at the content of it as far as OCR results, but I haven't reached the confidence level that you've set, then it goes to an overview by an operator to make a manual intervention. It can be reclassified. But once we have that classification complete, we do an extraction. We do a full OCR extraction of the document, and then we start looking for key values by using regular expressions. I need to find a PO number or PO dot $, things of that nature. And I'm just extracting that data. If I'm confident in those results and they met all the business criteria as far as rules for processing and the data is accurate, then it becomes 100% touchless and it's moved into the box repository or content repository of your choice. If we miss something or we didn't reach the confident level, then it goes to a manual validation by an AP operator. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's a business rule that says I absolutely have to have a PO number or I can't process this invoice. So if the PO number doesn't exist, the software will alert the validation operator that, hey, PO doesn't exist, I need that number, what do you want me to do? You can then send that off to a supervisor that can do the lookups, contact the vendor perhaps, and make that correction.
Hey, Steve,
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Angela. I just figured we did have a question come through, so I figured I would ask it
Sure.
since you're going through this. The question is, what's the typical cost to implement this type of technology, including license and implementation support? So I don't know if you just want to kind of hit on that a little bit since they're asking.
I'll touch that at a very high level. I would say that no two customers are identical and that it can be approached different ways. It could be a subscription license. It could be a cloud license. A lot of different flavors in this cookie box, if you will. But I can tell you this, the ROI you'll find is very compelling. I would be surprised if an ROI was beyond 18, 19 months for full implementation, services, testing, and into production.
Wow. And I think you're going to get to the right side of this screen, but just in case, there's another question, so you may want to just address it as well. When it comes to RPA, what's your perspective of the best tool to select between UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Blue Prism? So I don't know if you want to touch it here because you have UiPath up there, or if there's a later time that you might actually address it.
I'll let Eduardo address that as we move forward.
Great.
I think that's just the best way to handle it. But just to finish my part, Angela, there is some supervised training. We actually have a patent on how we classify documents. And if a document in this process where we need manual validation needs to be addressed, then we can do that through the screen that Scott will show you. But very unique product. It's all thin client, can run it in the cloud, run it on-prem, and then it matches up very well with Box and UiPath.
Great. And then again, before we go on, another question, and we love questions, so audience, please feel free to interrupt as I'm doing now. I'll make sure to interrupt our speakers. This question is, will all vendors require an onboarding process?
No.
No.
Not in this solution. The only vendor onboarding you need is it certainly has to be listed in your vendor database, but there's no special treatment to fully onboard somebody like an EDI situation. They just don't need to do that. They just need to send you an invoice via email or have you scan it. And as long as they're recognizing the back end on the ERP side that the vendor exists, you're good to go.
So one of the things specifically for this technology that I think is incredibly powerful is that you guys may know most invoices don't have a good name of the vendor. It just has a logo. And logos are very difficult to read or understand what they are. So what the technology does is really understands the address of the vendor, the incoming email, the phone number, and it doesn't match to your vendor master, and identifies the vendor, which is incredibly powerful in itself without you having to look for anything. And then it takes on your vendor ID information and adds it to the actual image. So now that you are really processing, this is how you truly get to your touchless invoices. And to address a little bit of the vendors, as it relates to the header level information, meaning invoice number, PO number, invoice date, amount, taxes, all those things, this uses artificial intelligence to really understand what the image is first. Then it will identify those specific triggers and look around them to identify if there is a number or a date or an amount that matches what is expected, and then provides a result. And here's where the confidence level, which can be pulled up and down, but it's incredible how the technology really works. It'll pass it through. Let's say I have 90%. I'm almost 90% sure that this is perfect. It'll go direct, which in my mind, 90% on the FSoft world really makes up to like 98% in my mind from the experience that I've had. And then it just passes it on for the bot to go in and index the information on your workflow system or indexing system, and then after approved, it basically processes it through your ERP. That being said, the onboarding to new invoices is extremely low. If anything, if there is a very specific data table extraction line by line that we are going to have to do a three-way match, like we're going to be showing in the next few minutes, there may be for really high volume vendors you would do that, and we're talking about 20 minutes of work. So it's incredibly powerful how this technology works. And I will address the difference between UiPath and Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism as I finish this slide, because I think it's an important thing, and I can give you my point of view on that.
Fabulous.
Steve, do you wanted to add anything else before we move on?
No, I think I'm good, but thanks for bringing up those points.
Yeah.
Great. So we are getting a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm just wondering, I know we have a lot to show as well, so I can ask you one more and then wait a couple of slides for the rest.
Yep.
Okay. So
okay.
One of the questions, and I think you're going to address it in a little while, but the question is, for a company with 80,000 annual invoices, what would be the estimated cost?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. For a company with 80,000 annual invoices, what would be the estimated cost of the system?
So the estimated cost is, if we're talking about only FSoft or UiPath or all that, I think that we need to think about it as per implementation. I can tell you now that from our end as Auxis, the implementation cost of everything as it means to set up without licensing, because the licensing, as Steve was mentioning, this is a capacity-based licensing type of agreements, and we look at them in a very specific model. So I cannot say on the licensing side exactly the cost. Those are managed deal by deal and on the size and what do they need, how many users are going to be interacting with it. So it's very difficult. But on the implementation side, I can say now that an implementation of the whole thing, FSoft and UiPath, we're looking at anywhere between $60,000 to $80,000. So you're looking at really good payback periods on most organizations.
Great, thank you for that, Eduardo. And you know, there's this one is just kind of a clarification, so I'll ask it, and then I'll ask the bigger question in a few minutes. This is, she might have missed it. She says, I might have missed the information, but is FSoft a service or a software?
It's a software. It is not a service. So it's a software that it's basically implemented on-prem or in the cloud. We basically develop the batch class to do and extract the data that is required based on the business needs of some organizations. Some of them are nonprofits and can be taxed, so there is rules specifically to them that need to be applied, and some of them have to be extracting by business unit, which comes in every one of their invoices, and we need to add an additional field for that. So that is the coding that happens on the back end, the integration to the vendor master, and then that becomes the software that primarily is going to be used to interact between the invoice processing people and their vendors. So they're going to be sending invoices, they're going to coming into this software, they're going to be queued. If they go through classifying, separating those documents, extracting the data, and the confidence level is fine, nobody will ever see it. But if there is anything that is missing, the image was blurry, we had bad quality imaging, so that's going to be, or a new vendor is coming in that doesn't have a match to the vendor master. You know how many times that happens. Somebody's buying from things that they're not, the vendor isn't set up yet, and we're receiving invoices from organizations that are not even set up as vendors. It happens often in some organizations, and that's the type of view that the invoice processing team will get. They're gonna get a queue to work on that. So let me just follow on so that you guys can actually see it when we do the demo, and I think it's gonna be better then.
Great, and I'll ask the next question later on after the demo.
Awesome. So after this, if FSoft, even though it's a software, is not meant for document or content management, so it is not going to hold your images forever. This information then is given to some type of image repository, and we're using Box, but like I'm saying here, this is a specific application. It's not mandatory, but it's something that we basically use because you need a technology that will enable you to interact with approvers, providing geocoding. Sometimes this happens earlier in the process, so it by no means feel like we are going to force you into this exact process. This is just to be able to give you a picture of the different, I think, modules or technology that is required to make this work. Then that's going to be routed for approval. Once it's approved, then a bot is doing the login into your systems. It's going to identify if it's a PO or non-PO invoice. If it's a PO, it will search for the PO number. It will match line by line based on quantity, unit price, what is open on the PO. Companies treat POs very differently. Some of them will actually add whatever is on the invoice to the PO, and their own system will provide the approvals inside of their systems. And some of the others, you just can't process an invoice that doesn't have any PO available, and it becomes an exception. So the bot will help us to really manage that. In case it's a non-PO and it has already gone through the approval process, we just got to go in, enter the invoice number, the vendor amount, and then just basically save the voucher and save. At the highest level, this is basically how the three technologies interact to really get to the 100% automation. If you really look at it, you're going to be managing where we've been able to get to is that you're managing the exceptions that naturally will never be able to be automated. If your vendor isn't set up in your system, you will always have to have somebody to take a look at it. If there is a bad image or a bad quality image, you're going to have somebody look at it. If for any reason we require approvals from somebody, that will have to be given to for somebody for manual approval, but there's got to be an interaction so that the bot can actually continue the work. And then if there is any discrepancies between what was approved, let's say that for some reason you're a nonprofit, you have you shouldn't be taxed on it, but somebody here manually validates that it's okay to pay taxes on it, it'll naturally go through this as a mistake. But once we get it in here, the bot will have enough rules and controls, even though the system may not have those rules and controls, to basically stop the process and say, hey, we have an invoice that is supposed to be processed with taxes. Nothing that comes with taxes can actually be processed. So we'll manage those exceptions that way. Now, when it comes down to, there's a lot of questions around the receipt. How do you match the receipt? And you do the three-way match if the receipt has not been done yet in the system. So we would use this workflow to say, we're trying to process it. We look at the PO, we're trying to do the three-way match, we haven't received it. And then basically the bot goes back and assigns it to a queue to be processed, to try to be processed again once the items have been received. So this is just high-level description, but it will provide you, and I just wanted to touch on some of those very, I would say, repetitive things that we have heard from customers, and how do we handle those with the bot.
Yeah.
So,
and Eduardo,
yeah.
again, I think before you do go on, I think it is smart to address the question that is being asked, because it's addressing the configuration displayed. So it's actually a twofold question. So first, given the configuration displayed, would an engagement require 4 separate contracts, or does Auxis become the master vendor, if you will?
Auxis is the master vendor, and we would manage. We are partners with all these 3 technologies, and it would just be one single contract. We would provide all of those as one point of contact.
Okay. And then the second part of that is, did the majority of existing implementation from this model result in a reduction, elimination of AP staff? And specifically, what they're asking is, how is the ROI justified? Is it hard cost or soft productivity savings, that kind of thing?
So what we have seen is that the implementation of FSoft will reduce 50% of the time spent indexing information, because as we're going to be seeing in the next few minutes, even though you're going to get touchless invoices and you should be looking at about 60 to 80% of that, there's always going to be this remaining team that needs to resolve for these exceptions. The difference, and this is what we're going to be getting into here, that typing the invoice number will no longer be necessary. So you're going to be, for the ones that even have exceptions, you're going to be able to do them in half the time. So what we have seen is that 50% of the people involved in the invoice processing and indexing, or the time spent doing those things, is no longer required. And then there is, of course, additional benefits around your processing faster. You're going to be able to respond to your vendors quicker if you have the invoice or if you don't have the invoice, because as soon as those are sent and received on the mailbox, immediately FSoft digests that information and classifies them, so you'll be able to search by vendor, and in the worst case scenario, you're going to have a smaller list of unclassified documents that you're going to have to go through. So I hope that responds the question. It should be, and we're going to go through a case study right now that shows that type of benefit.
That's great, Eduardo. And we have so many questions, but I'm going to stop asking them so that you can go through the actual presentation, if you will, and then we'll go back to I'll get to all of the questions.
Yes, I'm going to try to be accelerate a little bit so that we can get to the end. Okay. So in this specific one, we were doing is basically invoice exactly this solution that I mentioned before. This was a company that had significant volumes. They were acquiring a new organization, and they needed to not have to add bodies to the problem. They were moving from 40,000 invoices a month. I know that these volumes are huge for some of the people that are in the call, but you don't necessarily need to be this big to make a business case. We've also done it with organizations that are doing 5,000 invoices a month and very profitably. But they needed to get to a scalable organization that could actually ramp up and down as requirements were coming. Peak seasons, you name it. If you're doing, let's say you're a construction company and you have additional new projects and you're going to be buying twice as much. So what do? You naturally need to add people because it's not scalable, your current process. So that's exactly what they wanted to build. By implementing this, we were able to get to 60% touchless AP automation, and with that, they've been able to absorb the additional volume without having to add, people to the team. They've, incremented their speeds of processing. They had about 4 days of backlog on invoices that were received that needed to be processed. So at any given time, they didn't know outstanding liabilities in a whole week. And if they had to do an accrual around that, it would take them, as you guys may know, a significant amount of time to understand what that amount would be, or overtime. So this is a very impactful study or case study of where they really went from those 4 to 5 days of backlog to basically what is being received today, and being able to absorb this data quicker, identify problems faster, and reduce AP inquiries significantly. These are real world examples of things that we have done in many different industries. Some of them were using a AP services provider, some of the ones that we just saw on the previous slides. Some of them were doing 100% in-house. What we have been able to see is that their cost per invoice was significantly reduced, upwards of 30%, just by moving from their current manually intensive, headcount-driven accounts payable team to this automation. We also have seen that organizations have been able to even leverage additional savings by looking at using a BPO to process the remainder exceptions, not just go ahead and implement a technology, but also look at how do we leverage lower cost locations and forget about this turnover that we were talking about at the beginning, by using a third-party BPO organization that can just handle the additional volume that automation will never get to, just with leveraging that type of resources. So we have seen, like I said, like it's showing here, 30% average cost reductions on your invoice processing, and in some cases up to 40-50%. The reason why this one is 40 is because they were in a really low cost location within the United States, which is, as we know, not the case for the east of our country. So before we get into the demo, really quickly, I wanted to address the question that you mentioned about automation anywhere in UiPath, because I think it's and Blue Prism. As we were started doing this technology, and this was 5 years ago, we went through the process of exactly that decision. We are able to do automation anywhere, and UiPath mainly, but we are focusing really heavily on UiPath. And the reason has been because they're incredibly flexible, and they have worked with every single piece of technology that we've tried to connect it with. We're talking about JD Edwards, Great Plains, SAP, PeopleSoft, and any, even QuickBooks, or homegrown systems, websites of any kind. Their interaction with almost every application has been just wonderful. And that really led us to believe that this was a superior technology. I think that Blue Prism, which was the pioneer in RPA, don't get me wrong, it's a good technology. It's just much harder to build. If we have partners in Argentina that help us build some Blue Prism development, and it usually takes us double the time to get any automation in production. And we saw that from the beginning, and we decided that we were going to focus on UiPath. And that's kind of the reasons why we did ourselves a bake-off where we trained some of our developers, And we developed some processes in Automation Anywhere in UiPath and ended up deciding, for the reasons that I just mentioned, UiPath's our main RPA provider. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and Eduardo, we have we're 15 minutes into the end, so I have to launch a polling question just because we need to give our CPE out to our audience.
Yep.
I'm going to do that, even though we were planning on doing it a little bit later. I'm going to do it now, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Great, thank you. So the question is, audience, and again, if you can just answer it quickly, that would be great. Which of the following best describes the type of AP automation that you have implemented so far at your organization? And you can see the answers there if you would answer that. And I will make sure that share that. We'll collect it pretty quickly, and then we'll get to the actual presentation. Just one more second. Thank you.
That's fine.
They're so interested. Artificial intelligence really is smart, isn't it? It's amazing. It's amazing what it can do today. And I'm sure 5 years ago, it was so different when you were starting this as to what it is today and how quickly things have happened.
Yes, it is.
It's amazing. Okay, audience, I'm going to close the poll, and then I can just share that really quickly. So 38% of you said traditional AP processing solutions, 12% RPA, 8% RPA plus AI data capture, and 42% say none. That's interesting. Thank you, audience, and back to you, Eduardo.
Thanks for sharing. In the spirit of trying to be quick, Scott, would you be able to share? Let's try to make it as fast as we can. So I'm going to make you a presenter now.
Very good. All right. So as part of the demonstration we wanted to show you is how can you exactly do just this, right? How can we ingest our documents and start processing that information? So it all starts with FSoft Transact, where you're doing the smart document data capture piece. And ultimately, of course, what we want to be able to do is to be able to ingest your documents. Now, in my case here, I'm just going through and doing a live demonstration, selecting a handful of invoices that I've already grabbed just as an example, and I've kicked them off to start processing into the system so that it can start doing the classification, automatic separation of those documents, and then, of course, start to extract the meaningful data. If it's something that we want to monitor, at least kind of see what's going on behind the scenes, in most instances, of course, you won't worry about it. It's just going to process that information through and pass it on downstream to Box, UiPath, et cetera, so that you can take full advantage of that information. However, you can monitor the workflow as it's in flight. So we're seeing the ingestion of this particular set of documents and invoices being processed. Of course, there could also be multiple jobs being processed at any given time. So it does allow administrators to have that insight. And then in addition, if there are any situations where maybe some of your jobs do have some exceptions that require your AP knowledge worker to say, take a look, to put eyes on it, take whatever corrective action is needed, they can easily come into this user interface as well, select whatever particular set of documents might require that attention, and be presented then with a very clear view of the information that's now focusing their attention to whatever information has been violated by the business rules that were established. In our case here, we've processed a handful of different invoices. So you can see they can be one or multi-page documents, and it's automatically separated them. So you don't need to do any manual separation or barcode classification. If you are, that's fine. We can still manage that as well. But it's automatically gone ahead, separated those invoices for us, and then it's automatically stopped in any of those invoices to direct the, say, AP knowledge workers' attention to that which they need to understand or confirm. In this instance, it's stopped here on the first document here, highlighting the amount that's been extracted. In this instance here, we can see that it did grab the amount, which is in the bottom right of this particular invoice. We can tell that it's actually the correct amount. However, we set business rules in place that if it didn't meet certain threshold requirements, that we wanted it to pause and have someone reconfirm before processing forward. So that might be one situation or scenario. In our case, this is fantastic, it's accurate. I can just validate that and clear that field to move on to then any other invoices that might require, again, the knowledge worker's attention. In this instance, so just another example, you might have situations where your invoices or documents or your images aren't very clear, or maybe Bob spilled coffee on it again. So again, we set up validation rules, which say require that we need to have an invoice number. Well, again, as a human, I can quickly see and interpret that information on the document itself. So again, I can enter that information and then move on again to whatever the next document might be. This last example here, again, just moving yet to another sample invoice where our invoice number again is missing. However, as an individual, I can see it and find it on the document. And another way that can help accelerate your efforts and improve your overall accuracy is that beyond the manual data entry that I just did a moment ago, your knowledge workers can actually take advantage of the previewed content on the right-hand side to then select that information and have it automatically then be populating the details here for us so that I don't have to manually enter data any longer. And so that's another time-saving feature and also improving the overall accuracy and capture of that information so that then you're ensuring the optimal information and data being passed downstream into those applications. And then finally, before continue processing this information, as was talked about before, ultimately you want to be able to capture other aspects like your vendor details, so that could be pulled from reference databases automatically based on the information that's actually on the invoice itself, so you don't have to worry about keying that information in manually. And then if you do have table line item information as well, all of that particular data can be captured here as well, really enabling you at the end of the day then to capture all the most meaningful information and data that's necessary or needed for your downstream applications. And from that point, the knowledge worker just simply validates the changes that need to take place, and then it would move on to the next batch of documents if there are any that require attention. If not, of course, then it's just simply exporting that information out so that now we can see from a workflow standpoint, it's just going to then process this data downstream and export it ultimately then into Box and UiPath. And that's it. If you have any questions, again, feel free to post that into the questions section.
Thank you, Scott. I think you just
Great.
need to make
We definitely have a lot of questions, and so I'm not sure if there's anything else that you're going to want to show before I can ask all the questions of you. So you let me know. We do have one more polling question, and I'm sure anyone who's asking questions, even if we went 5 minutes later, I'm sure our speakers are happy to stay on. I don't think we'll take it all, but just in case, we always like to start on time and end on time. And I know that our speakers are happy to answer any of the questions even after this. So
yes.
why don't I just launch that last polling question, Eduardo and Steve, if that's okay with you, and then we'll address the questions. How's that sound?
Okay.
Great. Thanks for just letting me take over here. So audience, last one. Are you interested in scheduling a free AP assessment, learning about how Auxis can finance your transformation initiatives? So you can just answer that, and I will share that with Auxis. I won't send that back out to the audience. I'll share that with all of you later. I'll just wait a couple more minutes, and we do have a bunch of questions, which is wonderful. I'm so glad that there are so many that are interested. Again, artificial intelligence, all of this is just so amazing in what it can do today, and the time that is saved and how processes change. And it's just, we are in such an amazing time with technology, and I'm glad to experience it and love that people like our presenters know exactly how to bring it to us to make our lives easier. So as I'm collecting, it just amazes me how technology has just taken over our lives in so many different ways. Okay, I'm going to close that poll, and that's just going to be one that we're going to just close, and we'll share that with you later on. Eduardo and Steve, okay to start asking questions, or was there some final?
I just wanted to address how to make it right really quickly.
Yeah,
and I think it's going to take me 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So let me just go through that. For the people who are interested in seeing an actual demo of the robot, please contact us, and we'll be able to show you exactly how the robot works once FSoft provides this data. But it basically just mimics what a person is doing in their system, looking and doing the three-way match, understanding the lines, doing comparisons, and just typing away. But one of the things that I just wanted to address before we leave is really to talk about, how to do this right. As we mentioned at the beginning, 70% of finance organizations, sometimes fail in these initiatives because they're very complex. The one thing that you got to make sure that you have is realistic expectations. A lot of the people come in to me and say, I just don't want to do this anymore. I want to be 100% automated. But we all know that I would say that that is an impossibility based on the complexity of actual operations. And just having that organizational alignment will enable you guys to be successful. Then the next thing is really getting the right talent and experience. As we know, and I mentioned before, building that ecosystem of people that can provide the talent and can bring those expertise to make you successful, I think it's a key thing to consider as you're going down this path. Achieving organizational adoption is not just, to me, one of the key things is what I believe to be the true measurement of success. When your own organization is loving the technology, wants to do more, thinks that they can actually leverage this for different processes, which is a great thing about these two technologies. It's not just built for AP processing, it's built for anything that requires unstructured data and repetitive rules-based processes. So I think that is a big difference. And then, of course, as you mentioned, one of the questions was funding and delivering the right ROI is what's critical to making this a success. So there are three different ways to make this happen. You can either choose to do this internally, which means that you would implement this and then operate actual accounts payable operations by yourself. You could use a third party to help you implement it, and then all this technology, and then you take it on with your employees and you actually operate accounts payable, all the different exceptions by yourself. And then there is the other option, which is forget about it. And there are many different flavors of this. One of the forget about it could be a Cognizant solution, but or any other provider solutions where you send them the invoices and then just give them back to you fully automated. In this case, it's actually implementing these technologies and working with a third-party provider like a BPO provider to leverage the cost savings beyond just the technology savings. But what are the main differences, right? To do it yourself, as I mentioned before several times on this presentation, just finding the right skill sets is very difficult. There is going to be a long implementation because it's going to take a long time to find the right people that can do it, and then for them to grow and understand what it takes to build these solutions. The next thing, if you're going to use a third-party provider to implement it, you're going to be able to leverage their lessons learned, how they've done this in the past, where are the gotchas that you got to make sure that you take into consideration as you're building this. And there's going to be a short implementation timeline. The other thing is that because you're not going to be owning, the change of the organization will rely on your organization. The ROI is not guaranteed. You may only get soft savings, like it was mentioned before in one of the questions, because the organization isn't ready or focused on changing. If you use this technology with the third-party provider, the benefits that you're going to get is that some of BPO providers will actually guarantee the results and the cost reduction, regardless if they happen or it doesn't happen. So they can bring the technology. They're so confident that they've done this in the past that they can actually say, I can take on this operation. I will put in the technology that I've done in the past, and then I'm sure that I'll be able to provide these savings going forward. So the key takeaways, and this is the slide that I wanted to get to before we go, 60 to 80% touchless invoice processing is a realistic expectation, but not 100%. It is a short implementation timeline, which can be 3 to 6 months, depending on volumes, variations, exceptions, scenarios. We have done organizations that only have 3 invoice scenarios, and we have done others that have 22 invoice scenarios that took us a little bit longer than 6 months. So that will depend on your specific operation. It's significantly lower cost to own this technology and operate than your traditional AP solutions that we have been discussing about, which from the question polls, I saw that there was a significant group of companies in this event today that are using such solutions. The other thing is that this is a flexible technology. Artificial intelligence data capture can be used for a wide range of applications. It's not just done for accounts payable. It's being used for healthcare claims processing and HR onboarding and mortgage processing and statements classification. If you have to do that, you can use this for almost anything that requires unstructured data. And the last thing is that RPA can be used for all repetitive processes regardless of where they are. So the key benefits are increased, accuracy, reduced, processing backlogs, increased visibility to outstanding liabilities because everything will be indexed right here and there when it's received, and then it's going to be a highly scalable model. You'll be able to absorb additional volume without having to have add additional resources. And that being said, this is kind of the last poll question that was sent. I think that we want to offer for the people who were able to join today a complimentary AP optimization. We're going to look at your volume metrics, look at the different scenarios, look at how your organization is built, and then see if this is something that can actually work for you. So this is what we wanted to offer for the people who joined today, and please reach out. So that's pretty much any questions now. I think I was able to go through that as quick as I could. Thanks for joining.
You did very, very well. Very good, Eduardo. Very good, Steve. Thank you so much. And we do have a bunch of questions that I know I can share with you after the presentation, because again, we like to start on time and end on time because we value your time. So I think because we're at the top of the hour, as much as I would love to go through all of these, I think what I'll do is I'll offer them out to both Eduardo and Steve, and they can answer them by either getting in touch with you again. I will say this, one person is asking if they could see slide 21 again. So I don't know if you just want to show that really quickly as we're ending, just so that they can take a look at that again. And again, as much as I would love to address all of these, because you do have many questions here, there's probably like 5, 6, 7 of them that you'll be able to address. But I think the best way, instead of keeping everyone on, we will stick to our rules and I will offer them out to you. And to everyone that joined us today, I'm sure that you received some really good, valuable, and practicable information from both Steve and Eduardo. And if you do want to continue the discussion, I do encourage you to reach out to both of them or one of them at your convenience. And then I know that many of you have opted in to hear more. So if any of you on the in the ask and asking your questions, if you'd like to be contacted, but at first you had said perhaps no, you didn't want to, please let me know, and I'm happy to share your information with Eduardo or Steve so that they can answer your questions. We really do want your questions answered because that's why you're on. But again, we honor and value your time, and so understand that everyone's schedule is a little bit crazy. So with that, because we're 2 minutes after, I will say thank you all for being on our presentation today, and to Auxis and to FSoft, thank you so much for giving us your knowledge and your experience and your expertise. We appreciate all that you bring to the CFO Leadership Council and to our members. And with that, I'm going to say to everyone, this is the end of the webcast, and have a wonderful rest of your day.